our first talk is actually two speakers coming together for this one. Those guys have been at our conference several times now, and it's a pleasure and a joy every time. David Hutchens, CEO of the Storytelling Leader, and Michael McRay, founder of Becoming Restoried, have united their efforts and their knowledge and wisdom in a talk called Beyond the CSO, Why Narrative Intelligence is Everyone's Job. So David, Michael, I just gave you the hosting rights. And if you're here, please join me on air. I would love to pass the microphone to you. Welcome.
I think we're here.
Yes.
Beautiful.
All right, testing my mic. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can hear and see you. Lovely. Welcome to the conference. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, you too. It's great to be back.
Before we begin, just a kind reminder, folks, we have a translator working in the background. So if you take turns, just, be kind to the person translating. I know you're well paced, but, just paired talks are a bit more tricky. But apart from that, we're all here for you. Let's bring some fires for David and Michael in the chat, in the fiery button. Let me know when you need the slides, and I'm off the air for you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And you can go ahead and throw those slides up. I think we're probably good to go with them. There they are.
Right on.
All right, David, all you, buddy. Take us away.
All right. Welcome. Good afternoon. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. I am David Hutchens. I am CEO of an organization called the Storytelling Leader, and I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States of America. And this is my colleague, Michael, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Michael McRay, also here in Nashville. I get to do a variety of storytelling work, but most significantly, I think, with my colleague, David, here as kind of a senior partner alongside him in the Storytelling Leader, getting to support organizations around the world and finding and telling their most impactful leadership stories. And we're really delighted to get to be here to talk about this idea of dreaming beyond the chief storytelling officer role. I heard Artem just say we've been talking about how maybe it's a bit more of a skill set and less of a role. And we're going to kind of come back to this idea of, okay, so how should we be thinking about that role? And should we be thinking even beyond that? So really excited for this conversation today.
So at the Storytelling Leader, Michael and I are in the business of leadership development. This is skill building. And I'm going to say to you the dirty secret about the training industry that most training people don't want to say. And that secret is that a training program doesn't change very much, right? And maybe some of you have experienced this. We go in and the classroom is all set up and all the participants are there and we deliver the learning experience. And then everybody fills in the feedback form and gives you 5 out of 5 stars. And you go, yay, we were successful. It was a great program. And then later when you go back and talk to your client and say, how is it going? How's the storytelling skill set doing in terms of adoption? And they say things like, well, people aren't really doing it. Nothing has really changed. And that is true, that a training program does not generate a lot of change, doesn't generate a lot of behavior change. You have to build stuff around that. And so Michael and I are bringing you this message today just on the heels of a delivery. We just came back from London, England, a couple of weeks ago. And Michael and I are working with a big organization there called Merlin Entertainment. It's a big attractions company. They operate Legoland and Madame Tussauds Wax Museum and lots of theme parks all around the world. And now they are working with the storytelling leader to become a licensed deliverer. And what that means is now they're taking the frameworks and the resources of the storytelling leader, and they're bringing them in-house so that their team can deliver it. And what this means is now, instead of doing a training program like we always do, where maybe it's 12 to 24 people in a room, most often. Now the impact is measured in terms of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. And so as we come into this conversation, that's the context that Michael and I are bringing with us. We're thinking in terms of big systems. How do we take this capability and scale it all across a large system? And so, we joked around at one point where Michael and I were saying, maybe the name of our talk should be "Everything You Thought About the Chief Storytelling Officer Is Wrong."
Sort of.
And maybe the more accurate thing is, what is this role? Because it's being reported by Harvard Business Review and the London Times and Forbes are all talking about the emergence of this role. And what Michael and I are saying is, what is this role? And so Michael did something interesting. I wish I'd thought of doing this. He went to the internet and he grabbed the text describing different chief storytelling officer roles around the world. And remember the old days when we would do word clouds? I haven't seen one of those in a while, but Michael did a word cloud, and I thought this is a perfect use for a word cloud. What are people saying about the chief storytelling officer? And here's the word cloud that came from Michael's research. Take a look at that. And what are you noticing in there? And what's standing out to you about that? Kind of interesting. And this confirms my suspicions, because my sense has been that this new ill-defined role that everybody is talking about, most often organizations are treating it as a marketing role. And I find this a lot in the storytelling conversation, that people aren't even really defining what do we mean by storytelling. And for a lot of people, it's they equate it with what you see in this word cloud. Storytelling, oh, that's brand. No, it's a little different than brand, right? Oh, it's content, it's marketing. No, it overlaps with those things, but that storytelling is a much bigger conversation than that.
I'd be interested, David, if I can jump in. If people drop a fire emoji if when you tell people that you work in story or in storytelling, that their first assumption is you do marketing and sales. Is that a common? I'd be interested to see if any fires come in, if that's a common assumption for people. I find this all the time. I play a lot of pickleball. I don't know if that's big in other parts of the world. It's really big here in the US. And, usually at some point on the court, someone will be like, so, kind of, what do you do? And I say, well, I do storytelling work with organizations. And they're like, okay, so like marketing and sales. I'm like, no, it's not quite that. People can use it for marketing and sales, but it's not the primary purpose in my mind. And I think this word cloud was so revealing to David and I, and realizing when you search the all of the, chief storytelling officer job descriptions that we could find, these were the most common terms that even among the organizations, they're not dreaming big enough, I think was the kind of the thesis that David and I had. They're not dreaming big enough about what this officer role is, and they're relegating it to help us define our brand, deliver content, and help us market. And then we're thinking, we are not thinking in the scale that we should be thinking about the chief storytelling officer.
Well, last year I was in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I was working with an organization there, and we were telling stories, and we were going through the skill building experience. And at one point, one of the leaders in the program said, Boy, I'm so glad that our team member, Juliet, is in the room with us today because she's in corporate comms. And he looked over at Juliet and he said, I hope you're taking lots of notes. And I walked over and stood in front of the guy. I got a little aggressive. And I was like, no. I said, you don't get to outsource this skill set to the marketing group. And I see this a lot. You don't get to outsource this to corporate comms. And you see that because there's this fear. Once people start telling stories, they go, ooh, this is kind of vulnerable. Ooh, I'm not sure I want to do this. Let's let marketing do this. And so the thing that worries Michael and I when we hear this role, the chief storytelling officer role, is people are going to say, oh, let's give that to the chief storytelling officer. Who? Good. I'm off the hook. I can go get back to work. The CSO, whatever it is he's doing, can go do the thing. No, this is not a skill that you can outsource. If you've stepped into this role that is leadership, we're looking at you. You are the embodiment of the mission and of the organization. You are the teller of stories. So we don't get to take all this work and dump it onto one person. This capability is distributed, not centralized. And that's the work that we're doing with groups around the world. And so we envision a world where not one person or a few people are thinking about stories, but we're all supporting each other in this work. We're all lifting each other up the mountain as we build this most human voice of leadership. And again, we're thinking in terms of not 12 to 24 leaders at a time. We're thinking in terms of 1,000 or 10,000. At Merlin, it's 40,000 leaders. They're scaling it all across the system. What will that look like? What becomes possible when that many people are exercising this different voice? We actually don't really know yet. There's not a lot of data on this. There's not a lot of case studies of systems that have taken this skill set and scaled it big all across the enterprise. And Michael and I envision a day, we envision a word cloud, just like Martin Luther King did. I think he dreamed of a word cloud, right? We dream of a word cloud that looks something like this. Ed, what are the words you notice in there? This isn't about marketing. It's not about brand building. It's not about one person. This is a distributed skill set that goes to the heart of leadership and how we build the organization. And so, when we think about this role that's the chief storytelling officer, I like the archetype of the torchbearer. Not a corporate comms person. Torchbearer. The torchbearer goes first. The torchbearer walks ahead into the darkness and holds up a light, and then turns around and says to everybody, follow me. And then we all go on this journey together. And the fact that, the rise of the chief storytelling officer, it's a significant signal. It's saying something that people are using this language. For those of us who care about story work, this is our moment in the spotlight. And the opportunity is not to centralize it in a marketing role, but to lift the torch and turn to the system and say, follow me on this journey of exercising more of our humanity and bringing more of our humanity into our leadership. So that's kind of our point of view. And of course, the question is, so what does that look like? How do we do that? I think Michael has some thoughts about that.
Yeah. Thank you, David. So to recap what we're talking about here, I want to see if I can go back. Can I go backwards on slides, Artem? I'm not sure if I can. Can you jump back to the word cloud? Is that possible? You can do it. Okay, great. I can't. That's the one. Yep. Right. Yeah, the one that you have up right now. I can't seem to control the slides on my end. So just again, I want you to take note of the difference between these word clouds. So in the first one that we talked about, which is research around common job descriptions of chief storytelling officers. And overwhelmingly, the way that that role is being talked about is brand, marketing, content. And what we're saying is that's not the way we should be thinking about the chief storytelling officer role, because essentially what that's doing is that image that you saw of we're piling everything on one person's bike and like that. Well, story is the job of the chief storytelling officer. And we're saying no. The role of the chief storytelling officer should be looking at the language you see on the screen now: training, development, building, expanding capacity, stewardship, championing, visioning. It's not about what that individual can deliver with their output. It is about what that individual is tasked with empowering across the organization, right? So not piling the stuff on the one bike, but rather seeing that person as the person who is in charge of empowering everyone to raise up their narrative intelligence. You can jump ahead to that slide now. And so this idea about raising narrative intelligence, this is, I don't know how many, drop a fire emoji if you would, if you have heard this term before, narrative intelligence. A few of you, yeah. Drop one if you have heard of the term emotional intelligence. If you know this term before. Yeah, there's more people are responding, right? That's a much more common term, this idea of emotional intelligence, which many of us understand at this point. Emotional intelligence having to do with the idea that we all have feelings and emotions that we live with, that they are driving so much of our behavior, so much of the way that we interact with people. And it is in our interest to learn how to speak the language of emotions and to know what they're doing and what they're asking of us so that we can engage with people well. Narrative intelligence is the same thing, but around the stories and narratives that are driving our behavior. So we're going to get into that in a second, but this is as we're discussing this idea of narrative intelligence, know that our primary point of view on this is that the chief storytelling officer's role is not to deliver the output of story externally from the organization, but rather to lead the charge of championing, raising the narrative intelligence of everyone. So that what an organization needs is not a storytelling expert, but a storytelling champion. And those are qualitatively different. That the pain point of organizations is not that we need one person who knows everything that there is to know about how to do story well, and that any question we have about story, they have the answer for. That's not what I think. It's not what David and I are suggesting a chief storytelling officer role should be, but rather the person who has taken on the responsibility of making sure that everyone in the organization is expanding their narrative intelligence and raising their narrative capacity. Several years ago, I got to do a public narrative certification through the Harvard Kennedy School with Marshall Gant. Some of you may know that name. Amazing mind in public narrative, especially narrative for social change. And he talks about, public narrative as a leadership skill, which we agree it is. And his definition of leader is someone who accepts responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in conditions of uncertainty. I'll say that again. I didn't have a slide on this. It just came to me now. But the leader is someone who accepts responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in conditions of uncertainty, which means that a leader has very little to do with their title or their role, right? Like if my family's trying to figure out what to do for dinner and my kid's like, here's what we should do, the kid is the leader in that moment, right? Because the kid has said, I will take responsibility for helping my family find shared purpose, finding dinner when they don't know what to do. And so this is the task of anyone who wants to step into leadership, is to say, what is the shared purpose that we're trying to move toward? We don't know how to do it yet, and I will accept responsibility for helping us figure that out. So in the context of a chief storytelling officer, this person's job should be to accept the responsibility for leveling up the story capacity and narrative intelligence of everyone in the organization. So what do we mean by narrative intelligence? You can go ahead to the next slide. Narrative intelligence is the capacity to recognize, understand, and shape the stories and narratives in our lives. That just as we all have emotions and feelings that are driving our behavior, we also all have stories and narratives that are driving our behavior. And there is some distinction I would make between story and narrative. You know, there's different points of view on this. The one that I often talk about is I think that narrative is sort of the broader meaning making paradigm understanding of our lives, of our work. You know, we might have a guiding narrative. Like in the United States, there's a big one called the American Dream, right? That's a guiding narrative. And then we would have individual stories that illustrate that, a specific example of somebody who was living the American dream, so to speak. But we're all living out stories, but we're also living out those stories based on narratives that we tell ourselves about how we make sense of the world, how we understand our interactions with each other, what our work means, what our purpose is. And that narrative intelligence is learning how to recognize, oh, there's a story at play here. There's a narrative that's driving the way that we're pursuing this merger. There's a narrative driving the way that we show up as a culture in our organization. And that we want to be able to recognize that, learn how to understand what that narrative is and what it's asking of us, the principle embedded in it, the pain point it's articulating, the problem that it sees, the promise that it's making. And then in doing so, be able to develop the narrative agency to be able to shape the stories that we're living. So this is the idea of narrative intelligence. And this is not something that belongs to the chief storytelling officer. We're not looking necessarily for the chief storytelling officer to be the holder of narrative intelligence for the organization. We're gonna say this over and over again today. We're looking for the chief storytelling officer to take responsibility for making sure that that capacity is expanding across everyone in the organization.
Hey, Michael, can I jump in with something on that real quick?
Please.
Because when you said that, the thought that it just triggered for me is, you know, I've been reading about the neuroscience of mind. And the idea is that we think of intelligence as something that lives inside, you know, the confines of our skull. It lives in our brain. But mind is a group phenomenon. And like the story skill itself, mind is distributed. And so this is why it can't be held by a single role. You know, mind is what's emerging right now between you and me, Michael, as you speak. And as I say, ooh, that made me think of something. Now something new is being generated. And now people are making comments. Mind is a social structure. Story has to mimic that and also be social.
That's right. Yeah. Well said. You can go to the next slide with that. A way to illustrate what we're talking about is it's the difference between someone who can learn how to tell a good joke, right? You hear a joke, you're like, ooh, I can remember that. I'm going to retell that and make people laugh, versus understanding how comedy works and being able to be in the writer's room that creates the jokes for the comedian. So this is, or think about like, oh, I could go to I could watch a YouTube video of how to do a magic trick, a card trick. And I could do that and I could wow everyone with my trick. But that doesn't mean I understand the science of illusion and sleight of hand deception and could create new magic tricks. And most of what David and I see for storytelling education or storytelling training, coaching at the organizational level are people coming in to help folks learn how to tell a story better. And that's it. It's really just around, okay, you've got a presentation coming up. You want to be able to tell a story that's going to stick. Great. Like, here's how you're going to tell that story better. Often I got in a couple of weeks, I'm working with a COO of an organization here in Nashville who has a big keynote coming up, and she wants to get she wants me to help her learn how to tell the story of her ultra marathon in a way that's going to compel the audience. Great. Like, happy to do that. That's a worthwhile thing to do. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that when story as a training capacity gets limited to simply how do we tell a specific story more artfully, we are missing so much of what it's capable of. And what we're interested in, what we're suggesting you all should also be interested in, is not just helping people essentially learn how to tell a specific joke better, but learn how to understand how comedy works so that you can be in the writer's room. Don't just learn how to tell a specific story well. Learn the language of story. You can go ahead into the next one, so that story becomes not just a function, but a fluency. That we understand that there is a whole language to narrative and to story, and that the more we learn it, the more we expand our capacity with it. We're not just going to be the people who can get up and say, oh, I've got this great story that I can tell, but knows how narrative drives behavior, know how story shows up in these different capacities in organizations and in relationships, because the person who really understands that is the one who's going to have the superpower in the organization to shape things in the way that are needed. Go ahead to the next one. And so that story is not the marketing language of the organization. Story is the actual operating system. Because our brains, as David was talking about neuroscience, as humans, we are absolutely wired for story. There's a beautiful book by Lisa Cron I highly recommend called Wired for Story. And Annette Simmons talks about this a lot as well, who's one of the speakers at this conference. But that if you're a person, you can't help but be compelled by story, because our brain is wired for it. It is how we make meaning of our lives. And so there's a thing we could talk about called the story OS, story as the operating system for the brain, and therefore also the operating system for the organization. That it is not just the way we talk publicly about our work, but it is the driving force behind everything happening within the organization as well. Go ahead to the next one. And so as we're looking at story, we're seeing that story actually is informing, like as we raise narrative intelligence, it's going to be shaping the way that we cast a vision for the organization, how we are shaping culture and the quality of connection among the people in the organization, how we're dealing with conflict. Story has a great role. This is my background, is conflict resolution. What role does story play in helping people understand the conflicts that are taking place in the organization, as well as resolve them? Story is essential in getting people to buy in to a vision and to a strategy. It is, of course, going to be relevant in marketing. It's going to be relevant in sales, but it also is relevant in data. Like, how many times, David, have we heard, we go in to do something with an organization and folks would be like, well, I'm not a story person. Like, I work in the data, I do the spreadsheets, and there's this sense that they're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. And we're always like, if you look at your spreadsheet and you see, for instance, 2019's revenue was this number, and then 2020's revenue was this lower number, that big drop, there is a story there. In that case, it might be a pandemic hit. So it's like the numbers reveal story as well. And when we have an increase in narrative intelligence, we're going to be able to look at even things like spreadsheets and numbers and be able to see, oh, this change is revealing a story is at play. And how do we bring that out so that it's not, but when you think of the CSO's job as the person who's in charge of all things story, CSO doesn't have the capacity to be looking at every single spreadsheet and every HR document and everything to be like, where's the story here? But when the CSO is investing in raising everyone else's narrative intelligence, then you've got the people in accounting, you've got the people in HR, you've got the people in marketing, all who have the story lens on, and the amount of stuff that they're going to recognize and see is exponentially more than what one person can do on their own. So if you go to the next one, David, and then I'm going to hand it back to you. There's a line from Carl Jung that we really like that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What we mean by this is that there are as I said, there are these narratives that are driving our behaviors, are driving our organizations, the way we show up in our culture, the way we form strategy, our vision. But until we develop the narrative intelligence to recognize those narratives, to understand them and to shape them, they will keep driving the ship, steering the ship. But we'll do it with us not being aware of it. And so it will look as if fate is unfolding, that we have no control over what's happening. It's just like, we're just on this, the current has got us on this way. And that as we're expanding our narrative intelligence, we're learning to recognize and understand these narratives, which means that we are making the unconscious conscious. And now we will also have the narrative agency to shape our work, our lives, our relationships in the ways that we want. That was a lot of information. I hope, sorry for the translator. If I was going way too fast, I got really into it. So I'll slow down and pause, let the translator catch up. And David, you can take us into this final section.
Oh, just lovely. Thank you for that, Michael. So this journey of licensing and certification, where now the work Michael and I are doing is scaling this capability across big systems. We're working with EY Consulting to scale the story skill set to 10,000 employees across Europe. With Merlin Entertainment in London, that's 40,000 employees. What does that look like? Because that's a lot of different jobs. And so what they're finding at Merlin Entertainment, for example, is that I'll go back to this slide. That's a lot of different roles. And so if you're in the C-suite, this connects to how are we inviting people on this change journey that we're on. If all the way to the front lines, if I'm a ride operator at one of their theme parks, in the morning we have the team huddle, right? Before we open the gates at Legoland and all the kids come running in, the ride operators that we get in a circle, the team leader is there. And now, instead of talking about the weather or which rides are closed that day, now they're telling stories spontaneously, standing there on the ground. Tell me stories about exceptional guest experiences. And now as we do that, now we're creating a guest experience culture where it's knowledge sharing, right? And so when we bring this capability across the system, we're finding all of these brilliant applications and different outcomes for this work. So what do we take away from all of this? Chief Storytelling Officer, you're seeing Michael and I shift the energy from the role to the system. And I think some of the other speakers in this conference are doing that as well, right? The Chief Storytelling Officer is the torchbearer, is a champion. Don't get all caught up in making that person the expert. Expertise is distributed. We want to build expertise in story literacy all across the system. Think bigger than marketing. I have a friend who does great work in leadership storytelling. And I was talking to her earlier this week. She got a big contract with a big defense contractor here in the United States. And I was like, ooh, wow, congratulations. I mean, I'd love to have that contract, right? And she said, well, it's kind of weird because I put together the proposal. We're going to build the story capability, and in the proposal, it's a sales team. So we're going to do sales stories, and we're also going to focus on unleashing the humanity of the system and bringing more connection and sense making. And she said, I sent that to my client, and they said, ooh, we love this. You're hired. We want you to come in and do this. Take out all of the humanity stuff. Could you take out like the sense making piece? And we really want to make sure our salespeople get that good sales training. And I was like, oh my gosh, what did you do? And she's like, well, I wanted the contract. And so she took it all out. And I was like, I would have pushed back on that because we get that as well in our work. Give us the sales, give us the marketing, give us the influence. Leaders love this. Ooh, if I tell stories, I can get people to do what I want them to do. Yeah, you can. We can talk about that. And this is a much bigger conversation. And everybody's focused on the sale or the changed behavior. And so part of our role as story practitioners is to push back on that system and help them think bigger. They don't have this vision. We have to give it to them. There's more to this than sales and marketing and influence. There's the connection. This is a revolution of humanity that we're inviting into the organizational system. And our clients need help understanding that and seeing that. And that's on us to bring that to them. And then third, this brings us back to where we started. The dirty secret of the training industry is that a training program does not produce change. There's lots of stuff that you have to build in around that for scaling, for embedding, for reinforcing. We need to put systems and processes in place. And that's why this licensing journey has been so rich, is now Michael and I get to walk alongside an organizational development team or a learning team or a strategy team and say, let's stay with you until we start seeing that culture shift that you're looking for. So those are our takeaways. And Michael, I'll hand this back to you. And then I think we open this up to questions and answers. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, this is what we want to leave you all with, just this image. And if we could, I would throw back up the image of the person on the bike with, you don't have to do that, David, but just bring that back to mind, the person on the bike with all the luggage and baggage on them, and to say, this is the way that, based on the job descriptions that we see in our work with organizations, this is how the CSO officer is often, the chief storytelling officer is thought of, the person responsible for carrying everything on their own regarding story. And we're saying, no, that's not the way it needs to be. This is what the CSO role should look like in our minds. The person who is tasked with lighting the fires of story to shift and move across the organization. That, as David said, a training program does not produce the change, but it sparks the movement. It lights the fire. And the CSO's job then is to continue to pass that fire along and to make sure that the flame of story is being tended to across the organization. Thank you all. We really appreciate your attention. Artem, thank you again for the invitation to be here. I know we've got maybe 6 or 7 minutes left. Happy to hear some questions. There was one, let me jump back before, there was one question from Alexis. I already answered part of it in the chat, but you said, when you speak to organizations about narrative intelligence, what is the response? I have found a mix of excitement, but it also sounds like too big an investment of time and effort. And I think I've noticed the same, that there's some organizations who have been around in the story, like they're like, we've done loads of storytelling trainings, storytelling programs, we do one every year at our conference or something. We're looking for something else. And the narrative intelligence idea feels like, ooh, yes, like that's connected to story, but that's a deeper dive. Like, we're interested in that. Others who are just sort of getting into the storytelling as a capacity, narrative intelligence does sound a bit too like, oh, that sounds too advanced for us, even though it's truly not. And part of our job is to help them understand, like, oh no, it's not too advanced. It's actually like, if you start with this understanding of story, you're way ahead of the game. And like you're ahead of everyone else. But at the same time, I do think there's a degree to which you meet people where they are, and we're kind of guiding them along. So for organizations where we're meeting with them, we're having these kind of calls to see, do they want to work with us? If there seems like there's a bit of, ooh, I'm not really sure about narrative intelligence, but storytelling, that phrase, is really catching on, then we'll go with that. Because later on, we can start saying, great, that program, they're going to say, the storytelling leader, that was amazing. What's next? We're like, great. Now we get to talk about how we're going to raise the narrative intelligence of everybody. And so it's this sort of like, here's what comes next. So some will catch on to it right away because they're feeling like we've done storytelling workshops. We're wanting something deeper. And others who are just at the beginning, we kind of come around at the end on narrative intelligence, say it's time now to think about scaling this, licensing the material, certifying your people so that you're not relying on having to bring in outside consultants to deliver all of your story work, or you're not having to rely only on a CSO. You've actually trained and embedded and certified your own people to spread this across the whole organization. I hope that answers your question. David, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I am mindful of time, and I want to make sure if there are other questions. Tim, are there others that you are seeing that you want to call our attention to? While I've been talking, I haven't looked at the chat window, so.
It's all right. You've pretty much gathered all the questions that were there. And we have one more from Alexis. And I imagine that even as you are doing storytelling, you are also seeding narrative intelligence.
I mean, that's it's what we're practicing in the room. Is, you know, it's the licensing journey begins with experiencing the full skill building program, and then we stick around for the rest of the week and we exercise this intelligence and we start connecting it to the different parts of the work that we're doing. So again, our message to organizations is you're getting more than just a training program. You're getting a framework, a way of thinking that's going. And again, once we have thousands of people doing this, what's the impact of that going to be on culture and identity? We're really excited to see what's going to emerge from this.
I have two questions for you. One is actually connected to we have an experienced listener. So Tatiana is asking, I bought the Circle of Nine Muses yesterday. It turned out it is published in 2015. Well, at least in Russian. Has something changed in the system since then? Are there any updated editions? I would add to this question: how has the field of bringing narrative intelligence to organizations overall changed over the past 10 years after the book has been published?
First of all, thank you for buying Circle of the Nine Muses. That warms my heart. I think the biggest change, you know, that was 10 years ago. That was a lifetime ago. I don't even remember what the world was like 10 years ago. I think the biggest change has been the appetite for this conversation has increased. In 2015, we were starting to see kind of a groundswell of interest around storytelling. It's exploded since then. Now it's mainstream. Now when I go on LinkedIn and I do a search for storytellers, you know on LinkedIn you can put in your little title, what you do for a living. More than 2 million people, last time I looked, are now in the business of storytelling in some capacity. So that's the biggest change, and I see that in my clients. You know, in the old days we would have to say, hey, we think your leaders should be telling stories, and they would go, what? You know, it's kind of a weird idea. The sales conversation is very different now. A lot of our clients come to us and say, we already know that we need this. Tell us what your offer is. It's a totally different conversation.
Yeah. And I'll add to this. I know we're right up against time. I'll say that AI is taking over everything. Like, we're seeing this all the time. And I just accidentally got copied. I'm doing a storytelling workshop for this huge billion-dollar sales company in Atlanta in a few weeks. And they accidentally copied me on an internal email this week where they were basically talking about the strategy for training all these new AI agents to run so many different parts of their company. And I was like, I don't think I was meant to be on this. Or like, no, please ignore. I was like, yeah. So it's just like, this is what's happening, right? People are like, how are we going to train AI agents to do all this work? And if we are thinking of a chief storytelling officer role as the person who's in charge of writing marketing content or brand strategy, that eventually is going to be done by AI. Which is one reason why I think like that's not how we should be thinking about this role. Because one of the things I think, if people are smart, if we are smart and wise about the real power of story, we're not at real threat from AI. Because AI, what I think people are going to hunger for more than ever is what they can believe in and what they can sense is real. Because this is anything that's on a screen now, we're asking the question, is that real? Because AI could have made it. But what is undeniably real is the connecting power of being in a room with other people who are telling true stories about their lived experience and the feelings that you get when you have that. And that is, I think, where those of us who are doing storytelling work, we've got job security and we've got a power, because that is only going to increase in desirability as people are going to start craving that felt experience of something truly real and something transformative about being in rooms with other people telling stories. And I don't think that's gonna go away.
Vision. of the future. I hope it turns out exactly as you're saying. So being mindful of the time, guys, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing. And I wish you all the best with certifying this program and making sure like 40,000 turns into 400,000 and then additional zeros to the number of leaders. Quick question to both of you, a tradition we have. So story, and you of all people know that very well, can be applied to very many different things across the organization. But what if there was only one thing you could apply a story for, only one task or one area? I would like each of you to shortly choose only one task. Which one would you choose?
Yeah. I'll say quickly, I'll hand it to you, David, to give the last word. Culture and connection. That's what I think it is. That's my primary interest in story, is how to drive culture and tend to the connection of the people there.
And I'll build on that. If there were only one, it is disrupting the agenda with humanity.
Yeah,
That got a good
thank you
reaction
so
from
much.
him.
Give us some.
Good line.
My whole goal is to make Artem cry. If I can make him cry,
That's right. That's always the goal. Yeah.
It's so sweet.
Amazing. Thank you for having us on.
The pleasure's
Pleasure
all
to be
ours.
here.
So let's have some fires for David and Michael in the chat and in the fire button. Thank you so much for giving your wisdom to us tonight. Thank you.